Hey guys, welcome to this week's FAQ and Freebie Friday. Now before we begin, if you're new to the channel, these videos are all about answering your health related questions. So if you have a question concerning your health, something regarding health in general, diet, nutrition, Chinese medicine, herbalism, supplements, or really anything related to health and wellness, and you would like our help in answering your questions, all you have to do is leave those questions in the comment section below, and we'll be answering those based on popularity. The questions that we feel are going to be most beneficial to the group overall, and of course the questions that we are capable of answering. And something else really great about these videos is that every week from that comment section, we select one lucky person to win a free bag of tonic herbs or medicinal mushrooms. Now, if you don't have a question for us this week, but you're still interested in winning some free herbs, all you have to do to be entered to win is simply subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't yet already, give this video a thumbs up, and then just drop any comment in the comment section below. With all that being said, let's get to this week's questions. All right, so taking a look at our first question, this question is pretty straightforward. The question basically reads, is Shou estrogenic or not? They've seen clinical studies from PubMed that have stated that it is estrogenic and whether or not that this is an issue. All right, so really quick first, I just want to share with you a general rule of thumb regarding herbs and their estrogenic properties. So from my understanding, in regards to herbalism, usually across the board, any sort of leafy herb, so think of the various types of teas, green tea, matcha, black tea, oolong, as well as things like red raspberry leaf, all of these sorts of herbs tend to be more estrogenic. The leafy part of a plant tends to have the phytoestrogenic compounds in it and therefore make it more estrogenic. However, the root part of plants, so think of things like Shou, which is a root, herbs like ashwagandha, ginseng, etc., these things tend to be non-estrogenic and a lot of the times have androgenic properties to them. So as I've talked about in so many videos, ashwagandha is incredibly androgenic. It is one of the rare herbs that can actually increase the production of various androgen hormones like testosterone, progesterone. It can promote the production of thyroid hormone and actually has anti-estrogen and anti-prolactin effects. And Shou actually has some similar properties to this. As I'll share in a moment, Shou does increase testosterone and it is a pro-sexual tonic. So just generally speaking, for any future concerns or questions in regards to the estrogenic properties of herbs, just keep that rule of thumb in mind. If it's a leafy herb, it's more likely to have estrogenic properties. If it's a root herb, you're likely safe in regards to estrogen exposure. So now from my research, I've only seen one study that even mentioned any sort of estrogenic property associated with Shou. And if you look at this study, which you can see here, the study was done on an herbal formula that contained a bunch of other estrogenic herbs in it. And if you look at the Shou that is in this formula, it's being referred to as faux tea. And as I've talked about so many times in these videos, faux tea is not the same thing as Shou. Faux tea is the name that is usually given to what we refer to as Shou when it's in its more or less raw state. So this is usually just referring to the raw root, which is usually just dried, ground up, and turned into a herbal supplement. However, Shou is very different. It refers to a specific prepared form of faux tea, which goes through usually a dual extraction of some sorts, usually both alcohol and a hot water decoction. And traditionally, once it's hot water decocted, it's usually actually even boiled in a black bean soup to further make it more bioavailable and to rid the faux tea plant or the root of any sort of toxic substances. So in other words, faux tea usually has some sort of plant toxins still within it. It's not as bioavailable and it can lead to things like diarrhea if you take too much of it because of the fact that it still contains a lot of the plant toxins in its raw state. However, Shou is not going to have any of these plant toxins. It's going to have a much different chemical structure, and oftentimes a substance will stimulate or increase the production of estrogen not because it's phytoestrogenic, but if it's toxic, it can stimulate a stress response by the adrenals, which can also increase estrogen because estrogen will rise just under stress. So if you're taking in a toxic substance that can stress the body chemically, this could also cause a rise in estrogen levels. So from my understanding and research, Shou, the actual prepared root form of faux tea, is not estrogenic. I don't think it has any phytoestrogens that I'm aware of, and there's no research that I've seen other than the research done on the herbal formula containing Pho-T that makes or states any claims about Shou being estrogenic. And if anything, Shou is one of the most traditionally renowned sexual tonics, traditionally and classically used to treat sexual dysfunction, to restore libido, sexual vigor, and fertility levels. And if it were to actually be increasing estrogen, it wouldn't have any of these effects whatsoever, because estrogen is going to generally oppose the sex steroids in the body, like testosterone, and usually lead to sexual dysfunction. And beyond just this traditional understanding and uses, there are even studies like this, which talk about Shou, specifically Shou yin, so the prepared form of Pho-T, and it having pro-sexual effects, the ability to actually increase serum testosterone levels and improve sperm health. So this study is again looking at the prepared form of Pho-T, and it's talking about it increasing testosterone, which would mean that if it's increasing testosterone and having this pro-sexual effect, and since testosterone and estrogen tend to regulate one another, if anything, Shou in the prepared form would be a good substance to take for keeping estrogen levels in check. And from my understanding, again, in my research, there's no estrogenic properties to it at all. So if you're concerned about any estrogenic properties of herbs, remember to stick to the root ones. Those are mostly going to be the ones that support the balance of androgens to estrogens. They usually have some sort of androgenic property to them, as this study points out. And just avoid the consumption or use of any sort of leafy herbs, at least in excess. All right, getting to our second question. This is more or less a comment, but I just wanted to respond to it because I think it's interesting. So the comment reads, "Great video. I was wondering how I could lower my pulse." So now I'm answering this question because we talk a lot about on the YouTube channel about the importance of having a high resting pulse rate, somewhere between 77 and 88 beats per minute, as a biomarker or indicator of good thyroid function and a high rate of metabolism. So generally speaking, when the thyroid is working optimally, when it's working efficiently, you're gonna have a higher metabolism, which means that you're gonna have a higher resting pulse rate. Again, ideally between 77 and 88 beats per minute. You're gonna have a higher body temperature, somewhere around 98.6 to 98.7 degrees Fahrenheit. So you're going to be warmer. You're going to have a more robust circulatory system, so your hands and feet are always going to be warm. And all of these things will also generally result in feeling more energetic, more alive, and healthier and vibrant. However, when the thyroid turns down, not only is the pulse rate going to lower, but the body temperature is going to ultimately lower. This is going to lead to decreased circulation, feeling more cold, more intolerant to the cold, more stiff, rigid, usually less energetic, more lethargic, more fatigued. However, there is a case where the pulse rate is high, but the thyroid is not functioning optimally. You can have hypothyroidism, you can have a lot of negative health symptoms, but still have a high pulse rate or a fast pulse rate or a racing heart, so to speak. And this is because a lot of the stress hormones secreted under stress, like cortisol, adrenaline, the ephedrins, even things like nitric oxide and serotonin, can all mimic the effects of a fast, robust metabolism, again in a stressful state, so sort of in an emergency state. So this is a helpful survival response if, let's say, you're a wounded animal or a sick animal in the wild and you're ultimately not healthy, but you're being threatened. You know, an animal's going to try to attack you and kill you. The adrenal system will kick on. You'll go into this fight or flight state. You'll experience an adrenaline high, a cortisol spike, and this will get your heart racing. It'll drive the blood to the extremities and get you up and get you moving. But in the most refined sense, all of these qualities, they are pseudo qualities that are ultimately being produced by interfering with energy production in the cell. And in analogy, it's like paying your expenses on credit. So you're ultimately going into an energetic debt by keeping the metabolism high through the production of stress hormones. So it can lead to all sorts of negative health symptoms down the line. And most of the time when I talk to people with this sort of condition, they already don't feel the greatest. They might have a higher pulse rate. They might have a lot of the biomarkers of a fast metabolism. Let's say they're thinner, they don't gain weight. But a lot of the times I hear that these people, they feel anxious all the time. They're very easily stressed out. They sort of fluctuate between anxiety and depression. And although their heart's racing fast and they don't put on much weight at all, they tend to be more lean and skinnier, that they often feel tired and fatigued all the time. So again, in a few words, the reason for a high pulse rate if you're experiencing negative health symptoms is that stress can mimic the effects of a high rate of metabolism. So you don't necessarily want this. You want to have a higher heart rate. You want to have a body temperature around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. You want to be warm. You want to feel energized. but you want all of these things as the byproduct of good thyroid function, not from a stress high. So if this is something that you're experiencing, you don't necessarily want to lower your heart rate. You just want your heart rate to be beating as the byproduct of good thyroid function, again, not from an adrenaline high. So you don't want your heart racing out of your chest. You don't want a high heart rate because your adrenals are kicking off cortisol and adrenaline and you're ultimately stressed. You want to have a higher heart rate because your thyroid's working optimally and your cells are producing tons of energy. And I think the basic way to know the difference is, again, to look at some of the other symptoms. If you feel tired all the time and your heart's still racing, that's probably the biggest indicator that the heart rate is being driven by stress hormones, not thyroid hormones. So my tips for you would be to watch a couple videos here on the YouTube channel. The first one being this video here on how to lower adrenaline. I would also recommend a couple videos on how to lower cortisol and get those things back down into normal ranges. And then I'd recommend watching some of the videos on thyroid function, because ultimately what you want to do is turn down the adrenals and turn up the thyroid. So one of the best herbs for handling this hormonal imbalance is the KSM-66 ashwagandha. I think that's a must-have herb. It's a great, natural, clinically proven anti-anxiety, which is often a symptom of the high heart rate driven by adrenaline and cortisol. And so this herb is going to lower a lot of these stress hormones and while increasing and improving the production and functioning of the thyroid. But there's a lot of things you're going to want to do. This is a systemic condition that could be driven by psychological stress. It could be driven by dietary, lifestyle, or environmental stressors as well. So I would recommend our healthy weight loss course for getting a thyroid protocol. That course, again, is not just for people that are underweight or overweight. It's ultimately a course on good metabolic function. So that course and the protocols in there for good thyroid health would be very helpful. Otherwise, watch every video you can on our YouTube channel regarding the thyroid and lowering stress. All right, so I'm just gonna answer one and final question just for fun. This question reads, what do you feel about dry fasting to access the fifth dimension? So first of all, I'm just gonna say I don't know what you mean right away by the fifth dimension. I'm assuming what you mean is realizing and accessing a metaphysical plane. So realizing that you're not your body, you're not of the physical universe, you're not this hunk of meat, that you're also not your mind, which is also a non-physical universe, but consists of still energy and space and time, and that you're actually just pure awareness, the awareness of awareness, if you will. So from my understanding, we dwell in three universes at any time. We dwell in a physical universe made of matter and energy. We also dwell and live in a social universe, so a reality that's held together by ultimately communication, by concepts and shared ideas. And then we live in a metaphysical universe. So we have our own universe, which is usually what people refer to as their mind, how they're seeing the world, their own dreams, their own concepts, their own perceptions. So we all sort of have our own universe that we live in. And all three of these are intertwined and interrelated. So obviously the way you perceive the world and how you perceive life can be communicated to others in the social universe, which can start to form realities with other spiritual beings, other people. And then that can, transfer into the physical universe, and you can start sharing these ideas and bringing them to life, manifesting them by, building societies physically, building things on the physical plane. So that's what I'm assuming you're referring to when you say the fifth dimension. You're referring to a metaphysical dimension that is just pure awareness, and there's nothing physical about it. It is just you in your purest state as a spiritual being. And, applying all these things to yourself, you have a body, you have a mind, but you're a spiritual being. So a lot of people have the idea that they're a human body with a spirit, but the spirit isn't something that you have, because you can only have things that consist of usually matter, energy, space, and time. And the spiritual being is none of those things. It doesn't exist. It just is. It's metaphysical. So from my experience, we are all spiritual beings with a mind occupying a body. So the mind is like the bridge between the metaphysical and the physical, just like the social universe is the bridge between our own mind, our own world, and the physical. So we use communication, we use the mind, thoughts, ideas, and words and emotions to sort of bridge these two worlds and bring them together. So that's how I look at the body, how I look at us as a metaphor. The body is like the hardware. It's like a physical computer. The mind is like the operating system. And us, the spiritual being, we are the operator. So we are in control of the mind, and we use the mind sort of as a tool to operate the physical body. So if you're referring to the fifth dimension as you as a spiritual being, I don't think that you need to dry fast or need to go through any sort of physical suffering ultimately to realize this. This is a concept that goes back to the beginning of time. You know, if you look at the story of Buddha, Buddha basically starved himself. He ate like a grain of rice a day or something for a year. He stood on one foot for days on end, and he did countless things to induce physical suffering to finally realize that he wasn't his body or his mind. But I think that this is common practice for people to put themselves through some sort of physical stress to realize the concept of mind over matter. Because if you put yourself through physical stress, your mind starts to kick in and you get reactive, and your mind starts telling you to stop to keep the body alive. But then there's another person in the picture, which is you, going, no, I'm not going to listen to you. I'm going to do this anyways. I'm going to endure and push through. And I think even realizing that there's this concept of mind over matter, that there's multiple entities within yourself sort of communicating, that even this is a form of spiritual awareness. And certainly you can do it through something like dry fasting, but I think all that's really occurring is that you're realizing that you're not your body or your mind. And I don't think you have to put yourself through physical suffering to realize that. I think it'll certainly help. It'll expedite the process, but it's going to have negative consequences, And I think this is a practice that I see, or a concept or a consideration I see in a lot of religious groups, is that, you have to put your body through all this physical suffering to realize that you're a spiritual being. A lot of people misunderstand, I think, the concepts of Buddhism through this as well. They sort of denounce the physical body and they stop taking care of the body just because they realize they're a spiritual being, or because they're trying to realize that they're a spiritual being. But I don't think that's a truly wholesome and fully responsible approach to realizing you're this powerful spiritual being. I think being responsible towards your body and your mind and still realizing you're a spiritual being is a higher form of spirituality, or spiritual awareness, if you will. So I don't think that is the safest route to go. It's going to have negative consequences on your body. Sure, you're a spiritual being, and if you have to realize that through physical suffering, to each their own. But there are multiple practices you can engage in that require you not having to put your body through any sort of physical pain, just to realize that you're not the body and you're not the mind, but you're the awareness of awareness. You're the awareness of the mind. You're the awareness of the body. You're ultimately pure awareness, perceiving life, creating considerations and using your mind to create this game of life you call human. So I don't think you need to do it. That's my personal opinion on it. You can do it if you want to, but at the expense of the health of your body, will you realize who you truly are, which you can do through other means, from my experience at least. Anyways, guys, that brings this FAQ and Freebie Friday to a close. If you enjoyed it and found it helpful, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the YouTube channel for future videos just like this. And of course, if you're interested in learning more, for referencing any of the studies or any of the herbs or additional resources I mentioned in this video, you can find all of that in the description box below.